Hello everyone, this is Peter from Birds of Play, and welcome back to 5 Things to Fix, a series where we take a hard look at some fantastic Final Fantasy games and offer up our 5 cents on how they could have been made even better. In this video, we will be taking a look at probably the most iconic and beloved game in the entire franchise, and my first introduction to the series. The game that defined a generation and refuses to become a thing of the past. I am of course referring to the one and only original Final Fantasy VII. There will be some spoilers ahead, so be warned. Fix number 1. One look to rule them all. Final Fantasy VII marked a historic turning point for the Final Fantasy franchise in many ways. Not only seeing Square breaking the company's long-standing ties with Nintendo in favor of the new and shiny PlayStation, but also making the jump to 3D, betting everything in order to stand at the forefront of the home console technology at the time. The result was an impressive computer game epic that spanned 3 separate discs, offering up a compelling narrative and the visuals to back it up. It is nevertheless quite apparent that Square was still treading new ground with this installment, meaning that the visuals were still a bit experimental. The most notable example of this being the somewhat jarring discrepancy between the character models in and out of battle, with the addition of the 2 styles also being apparent in some of the pre-rendered cutscenes, either displaying the chibi polygon versions of the characters or the more realistically proportioned character models. This was also most likely due to the game's development history, having been partly made with the Nintendo 64 in mind, explaining the different art styles in terms of how they were meant to conform to the available hardware. Final Fantasy VII actually does make a really strong case for this discrepancy being a non-issue, in practice offering up 2 markedly different versions of the same characters, and not only getting away with it, but actually finding both versions being celebrated in their own way. Regardless of their lovability, however, this discrepancy sometimes undermines the consistency of the aesthetics of the game and adds to the game's lack of clear artistic direction. The issue is, however, more widespread than just the character models, since the backgrounds and the camera angles often seem to be designed with them in mind, making it a bit strange to just exchange them for more realistically proportioned character models. A satisfactory fix for this problem would therefore have to involve some drastic visual revisions of the original game in order to be aesthetically pleasing and cohesive, reworking the world to better suit the characters. That sounds like a lot of work. I guess I could just always remake the game instead of fixing it. Fix number 2. More Medka, please. The city of Medka has always been prominently featured in promotional materials for Final Fantasy VII, and understandably so. The unique appeal of the city being showcased right away in the opening cinematic, as the camera zooms all the way out from a dark alleyway to a wide shot of the entire city, before finally zooming back onto a separate part of the city. Just like the jump to 3D graphics, Medka represents a departure from the franchise's status quo by offering up a more post-industrial setting in comparison to the more fantasy-inspired settings of earlier installments. The city's systematic divisions into separate sectors, whetting the appetite of those who want to explore every nook and cranny of this monument to human ingenuity and hubris. Hubris, I tell you! Hubris, I tell you! The fact that Medka plays such a small part in the events of the actual game is therefore a bit of a letdown. This is made even worse by the fact that once you leave the city, you will have to jump through some hoops in order to get back in. When Barrett says that people don't leave Medka, it's not meant literally, as if they were compelled by force to stay, but rather it ties into the game's social commentary on poverty in the game, and the lack of recourse afforded to the people of the slums. It doesn't mean that the entire city is a prison, and that the party actually manages to escape, so you should be able to come and go as you please, possible wanted status aside. Once you do manage to get back in, there sadly isn't a whole lot waiting for you, which is a real shame, since Medka could have served as an interesting location to revisit throughout the events of the game, uncovering its mysteries sector by sector, as well as getting to explore the upper plates in more detail. All optional, of course, because if there's anything that Final Fantasy VII has taught us, it's that optional is sexy.
Stop talking about sexy stuff!
Fix number 3. The Gold Saucer could be so much better if you listen to me.
Just like Medka, the Gold Saucer is an iconic Final Fantasy VII location, consisting of a giant amusement park towering over the ruins of Old Corel, Barrett's hometown that got razed to the ground by Shinra. However, in order to get there, the player must first walk through North Corel, a town built by the survivors from Corel. North Corel basically being just a collection of crude dwellings, barely fit for dignified human living, due to the impoverished conditions of the inhabitants. And what better way to get yourself psyched up for some world-class amusement at what I presume to be the world's premier amusement park. Having a bit of fun and just forgetting about the troubles of the world. Yay! I want to pay 200 gil just to shoot some hoops. Just for comparison, Cloud got 1500 gil for taking part in a terrorist operation, wherein he bombed an entire Mako reactor, risking his own life as well as endangering everyone in the vicinity of the reactor. That's almost enough gil to play 8 rounds of shooting hoops. But leaving Cloud's knack for financials aside, or lack thereof, there are probably some things that could have been done to improve the visitor experience for the park, making it even easier to forget about the troubles of North Corel below. Not to mention a desert prison directly below the park. Some of the Gold Saucer's problems have to do with the attractions themselves. The event square in itself being particularly uneventful, aside from one memorable moment. The Wonder Square is a lot more packed with different things to do, the square itself being a wonderful microcosm of Final Fantasy VII, putting the game's love for minigames on display. It's just a shame there isn't a slap machine to imitate Tifa's confrontation with Scarlet. And while we're on the topic of slapping, remember to slap that like button, and maybe even hit that subscription button now if you haven't already. But now, back to the problem at hand. And no, it isn't the quality of the minigames, even though they could use some improvement. The thing that always annoyed me about the Gold Saucer is the fact that your BP, or Battle Points, are only valid during your stay at the park, or more specifically, your stay at the Battle Square itself. This forces the player to prepare for an extended stay at the property, if the aim is to get all the best prizes. This breaks up the flow of the game in a bad way, and also runs the risk of just being plain boring. Just like my dream version of Medka, a city you would gradually uncover as the game progresses, the Gold Saucer should be a place you come back to again and again, slowly but steadily building up your BP, and never feeling like a visit was a waste of time. If you want me to play, don't force me to stay. Fix number 4. Show some claws. Another innovation introduced to the series by Final Fantasy VII was the abolishment of the dedicated class system. Sure, the characters retain some semblance of priorly established classes, Tifa being reminiscent of characters such as Yang from Final Fantasy IV. Well, maybe not the character, but rather the monk class itself. In addition to this, Cid fights like a dragoon, and Yuffie is obviously a ninja, just to name a few examples. Due to the way the materia system is implemented, however, it often feels like you have 3 sets of materia as opposed to 3 unique characters to choose from. From a certain point of view, this is actually one of the game's strengths, as it allows the players to more easily pick their party of choice without being burdened by specific class limitations. Also, from a practical point of view, there's nothing inherently wrong with the way the game plays in this regard. So, why fix something that isn't broken? Well, it's not broken per se, but it all feels a little bit flavorless, as if the characters could have done with a little bit more spice. Spice is of course a matter of taste to some degree, but this lack of dedicated classes also presents some problems for how well the story of the game and the gameplay mechanic mesh together. There are of course other games in the series wherein everybody can basically just become everything. For example, the job system from Final Fantasy V, and the junction system from Final Fantasy VIII. The difference, however, is that this ability to slip into practically every role is explained by the lore of the game world. The crystals in Final Fantasy V imbuing the party with the power of different jobs, and guardian forces in Final Fantasy VIII lending them their power. In Final Fantasy VII, the party does rely on materia for some of its power, but the characters also have distinct backgrounds that explain some of their abilities. Cloud being an ex-soldier infused with Mako, and Tifa having been trained by Master Sangan, a master of the martial arts. One way to introduce some sort of class system to Final Fantasy VII would be to give the characters different affinities with different types of magic. There are already different types of materia, the 5 types being magic, summon, command, support, and independent. Different characters could have a different affinity or proficiency with the different types of magic, as well as the game could differentiate between white and black magic. I imagine that this fix wouldn't be everybody's cup of tea, but it does its best to deal with the problem of the dissonance between the narrative of the game and the gameplay itself.
'Cause we're living in a materia world, and I am a materia boy.
Fix number 5. Kate Sith. What are you? Kate Sith? Cat She? Or however your name is pronounced. I guess we'll find out in the remake, but my bet is on Cat She, since his Japanese name is Ketoshi. Regardless of how the name is pronounced, there are many mysteries surrounding Kate Sith. Yes, I'm saying it that way until proven otherwise. Hopefully we won't have to wait too long for that. As of this moment, there are nevertheless quite a few things we know about Kate Sith. For example, we know that Kate Sith is in some way controlled by Reeve Tuesti, one of the higher-ups working at Shinra. I know there is some extended lore scattered around the compilation of Final Fantasy VII series, but even after familiarizing myself with that, the relationship between Cait Sith and Reeve is a bit difficult to grasp. Sure, Reeve is controlling Cait Sith with his mind, but Cait Sith also seems to have a mind of his own, as we see when he sacrifices himself to get the black materia out of the Temple of the Ancients. The fact that Cait Sith's level of sentience is in no way explained in the game makes it difficult to grasp the real extent of his sacrifice, effectively undermining his most powerful scene by confusing the player as to its meaning. But I would actually like to talk about another factor that seemingly downplays Cait Sith's sacrifice, and that's the fact that a second Cait Sith comes along way too quickly, robbing us of the chance to really savor his passing. Not to mention the new Cait Sith crashes in on a disturbing scene as if nothing happened. The fix I would like to propose would therefore be to make Cait Sith be absent for a longer time. In fact, to only make him reappear to rescue Barret and Tifa, once Shinra has captured the party much later in the game. There are some players that might start to miss Cait Sith if he was missing for such a long time, but as they say, absence makes the heart grow fonder. Also, the only unique thing he contributes to the story in between the Temple of the Ancients and rescuing Barret and Tifa is this unique way of showing his grief over the loss of a dear friend. I'm not sure if that's appropriate, catchy.
Thanks for those great fixes, brother. And now it's your turn, the viewer, to leave some comments down below telling us about your fixes. And also don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like, and maybe even join us for some bird sounds.